Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1 of the Netflix show Travelers. Before I go into it, do know that this is a spoiler, quote-unquote, review. I'm just going to be talking about things not in any particular order, so if you have not watched the entire first season, don't listen to this, because it will spoil a lot of stuff for you. Just letting you know ahead of time, you have been warned. So jumping right into it, I really like this show. I saw a thing about it before, but I completely forgot about it. So it took me like a week before it finally clicked in my head. I was like, oh yeah, that totally came out, because it came out the same day as the Sense 8 special. So I think that's why I kind of forgot about it. But nevertheless, I went into it not really obviously get a little bit of the premise from it and everything, but I didn't know what to really expect going in. But I really liked it. I like the whole concept of them time traveling. I thought it was they are time travelers, but how the whole system works is they time travel their consciousness rather than their body. They time travel their consciousness. There was something else that had a similar premise when it came to time travel and everything. I just can't remember. Something else was similar to that. I just can't remember. But essentially, there's a whole way that things work in it too. They basically they can only transfer consciousness into someone that was about to die. They never really specified. I don't know whether that's a situation where it's they choose someone whose timeline was about to end anyway. So it's not that. I can only assume it's like that. It's because it's not to impeach too much on the grand timeline thing. Because it's the thing with time. Travelers always kind of try to do the least amount of changes. Obviously, do the big changes that needed to save the world, but essentially don't actually do anything that could alter the history in a way that truth be told, is at the grand scheme of things, it's you don't really know for sure what will change anything. Because that's what I thought was very interesting, because it's okay, we're not even halfway through the season. Well, we're about halfway through the season when they kind of quote unquote saved the world, because essentially they came back to stop a asteroid known as Helios 685 is going to basically crash into the planet in 18 months from the present time, and that would lead to a lot of stuff, mass destruction, obviously, a war between, just kind of it's just a very dystopia type of future where it's just kind of resources are running low. Because there's even to kind of show you where everyone is, their mindset is when it came to Grant McLaren, because that's another interesting thing too, is the time travelers go by numbers. They don't actually have names. So I wonder, is names a lost concept, or is it just I guess it's because when you're becoming that person, when you're time traveling and become that person, you lose your identity. All that matters is who you are now. Because when it comes to being who they are, they refer to each other by their host's name. It's take Philip, for example. He's not who he was in the past, in the future, but for them the past. He's simply Philip. So, but nevertheless, it's you take Grant, for example. He was tasted the coffee. He's what? Oh, that's what cow's milk. And his wife Catherine's well, what were you expecting? So a lot, because even Trevor kind of commented on it. The fact is, he was oh yeah, it's ground beef. He's Philip's that's not actually grown from the ground. He's I'm not asking questions. It's good and it smells amazing, and that's all I care about. Because a lot of them, it seems are on a vegan diet. There's even a point where you see Philip kind of being a little bit out of his mind. It was that episode where basically everyone was kind of tripping balls because of the antitoxin. And he happens to be looking down at some food, and it kind of reminds me of the meals from The Matrix. The way it kind of looked like grits or kind of oatmeal looking. That's what it kind of reminded me of. So that was kind of instinctually. So I'm getting because that's another thing too, and that makes this very interesting. You never actually get to see the future. I'm curious, is that something we're going to see in the second season or not? But I'm not going to. I'll get to that later on. But just it's you hear about the future, you see little things referencing that. There was even a point when Grant was making out with Catherine, they're about to have sex and whatnot, and he sees a different person. So I'm assuming that's the real Carly that he was imagining, what she looked like in her original body, and not just in Carly's body. But you never really get you get references to the future, but you don't actually get to look at it. It all takes place here in the present. So overall, I'm bouncing all over the place. Like I said, I apologize for that, but characters really like it. It's so interesting. Everyone came from different situations. The person that came into Marcy's body is yeah, our profile, because basically all their information on the Pacific like host that they chose were based on basically information they have from the future. It's like, oh yeah, there's these record books of basically telling you everyone's information. So the person who got inside of Marcy's body, like the information they had on her was based on a fake profile that her and David created together to kind of help her a little bit. Kind of like an imaginary life of like, oh yeah, because Marcy doesn't actually work as a librarian and David's not a reporter. He's her social worker because apparently Marcy had mental disabilities. And then it's just like something like, and she was suffering from an illness that was, killing her. Obviously, because like that becomes a big part of Marcy's story as the season progressed. But also that the fact is that Philip was addicted to heroin and stuff like that. Like out of anyone, they got it the hardest. I feel like because they're the only ones that really had problems with their host. Everyone else just kind of assimilated. It was just kind of interesting seeing how Carly assimilated because it's like. You were like the fact is she did care about her baby Jefferson, like or Jeffrey Jr. essentially, but she cared about her child, like even though it's not necessarily her child. They kind of had to keep reminding her, it's like that's not actually your baby, right? That's your host baby, not yours. But it's like she cared for the child, even when the whole situation with Jeff came up later on in the season, being like, oh yeah, like he's trying to get sole custody and everything, which was like, oh that whole situation sucked because it's like. I hated Jeff so much. It's like, for one, you're a piece of crap, abusive husband, and it's like you're like, oh no, we would have been great together. It's like we need to get back together and everything, and it's just like, oh, shut up, you slime ball. Especially because he does the whole situation. He tries to turn on Grant because he had that confrontation with Grant where he was like, you know what, you're having sex with my life. It's like, you know what, fine and Danny, we were split up, you can do whatever you want to. But it's like, no, me and Carly are trying to get back together, so how about you stay away from her? And it's like, Grant's like, really? Dude, come on, you hit your wife. It's like, no, that was this and that. It's like trying to explain it away and everything. And there was even that moment where Carly was trying to get proof of him being abusive and like almost trying to antagonize him and hitting her in on camera or whatever, and he's looking at her, it's like, do you think I'm really that stupid? And he turns and looks at the camera. It's like, you're not. And for one, the response there would have been like, no. The proper response would have been like, what? You actually thought you're trying to get proof I was going to hit you? I'm not going to hit you. But it's like, no. Do you think I'm stupid? Meaning, if that camera wasn't there, he would have hit her. It's like, and you expect her to want to be with you, be a family with you, you piece of crap. And it's like it's because that's a big thing about this season too. Is like having to struggle between balancing because everyone has these little protocols they have to follow. Like, what's it like? Protocol 5 is like resume your host's life. Protocol 3 is that basically you don't save a life and you don't take a life. Which protocol 3 I kind of get, but I can understand because it's a situation I was like, okay, I don't take a life, I get it, but why not? Why can't we save a life? Because Philip, out of anyone, has that biggest, like, that's a big part of his storyline. It's like he gets tired of it because it's like he, as the historian of the group, has all the information about time kind of memorized about exactly when and where someone dies and how they die. And it's just like, it's a situation of like, you don't know who you're saving and you don't know what saving that person will do to the timeline. You don't know whether like that person you're saving now might be an innocent kid now, but maybe they grow up to become a dictator later on. It's one of those situations, but also you don't know if that person might go off and kill someone else that could have made some great impact on the future. So it sucked. It's that hard situation you find yourself in when you're a time traveler. I say that like I'm talking from personal experience, where it's like you want to do the right thing because obviously they're there to save the world, and it's like we're here to save the world, sure, but it's like what about the other people that kind of fall in between? But that kind of seems like that disappeared a little bit with Philip because he realized, I guess, like the ramifications for doing what they were doing. So I don't know, because eventually he got rid of all the names he had written down on that door. But essentially, the point I was getting across was like I wanted to make was like the whole like resuming each other their lives. Like for Trevor, that meant going back to becoming a regular high school student, struggling with the fact is that being who he is, because apparently Trevor is like super old. Because they even reference like the fact is like, yeah, Trevor's actually older than all of us put together. Like he might be in the 17-year-old's bodies, but he's like over 100 years old. So. And you can almost tell it with the way he talks to certain people. Like even when he talks to Carly, like when they were captured and being interrogated, he referred to her as ma'am. So he does have like a respectful nature. So it's like it does make you wonder, will we ever get to see what they originally all look like before they inherited their host's body and whatnot. So and then like Grant struggling with the fact is that like he's not really Grant, but he has to be Grant, not just to his wife, but also to his partner, Forbes. Because I really didn't expect things to take the turn that they did. Because like I said, like I came into this thinking everyone was like, okay, obviously we got our 5 main characters, they're time travelers. But I didn't know about the whole consciousness thing. And so what I was thinking was, okay, so those guys are time travelers. And I thought they were going to work with Grant, like FBI agent Grant, they were going to work with him. I didn't realize that there was also going to be someone else jumping into his body. So that was kind of interesting, especially when they started telling him everything. And I was like, huh. And it's like, oh, his mind's about to be taken over. And it's something that Grant deals with himself, is like struggling with, because it's like they kind of forget about the fact is that they're inhabiting someone else's body and what that means. It's something we got a little peek at. It's like once you've inhabited someone's mind, their mind slowly disappears. Like, because there's that point when Grant got hurt that in his mind, the nanites kind of were showing him there was basically fragments of the original Grant's memories that he was getting peeks at. And the reason was because there was like some level of consciousness, little fragmented memories that were left that he was kind of getting a peek at. But it's like they can't be accessed because like once he was shown them, they were like, those were like all that were left, and they were slowly fading away as his consciousness became the only consciousness that existed. And it's like no one else has had to really deal with that except for him. Just I guess because of the whole circumstance and everything. And it's kind of super sad because it's like that shows you that Grant is dead. That no matter what happens, like when it's all said and done, Catherine would never get her husband back. I mean, because the whole point is that basically once they, because that's also one of their kind of mantras too, is like, because they have a little prayer that basically said like, okay, let's go out there, let's save the world, even if it costs us our own lives, our own existence. Because basically it's a situation of like, we save the world, that means things will drastically change, our future will drastically change, meaning that when it's all said and done, we might like, time might play out in a certain way where we don't exist anymore. So it's kind of something that has to be, kept in mind. But the fact is they avoided Helios, yet they're still here in the present day. And they're like, okay, what is that? What do we do? And it's like, okay, we resume our lives. But we see them all kind of struggling with that because it's like, because it's a situation where they kind of went into it thinking like, this be over with. Once we completed our mission, once we stop Helios, then it will all be done for. But then it was like, apparently that wasn't enough because they're still there, so they had to deal with struggling with their lives. But when they were kind of slowly kind of getting adjusted to it, because a big part of that episode was coming to terms with it, but also dealing with the fact is that they were tripping from the side effects of the antitoxins. But then they kind of snapped back into it when they found out they had a new mission, because it was like, because they were kind of struggling with what their purpose was going to be. It's like, okay, because they're not themselves. They're not these people. It's like we're living someone else's life. Because even Philip himself is dealing with it when he was like in an AA meeting. He was thinking to himself that he was going to tell everyone or two. He's like, oh, I'm from the future. He's like, it's been so long that I don't even remember my own face anymore, And it's like, the fact is, I can't be that person anymore. Like, with the situation being it is, this is who I am. I'm Philip. That's all I am. I'm not the person I was before, because my past is supposed to be forgotten, which is something that Grant and Carly had to come to terms with. It's something that popped up in like the final episode, which Carly really didn't appreciate. She's like, no, I'm not going to, like, you said we can make this happen, but Grant come to realize it's not a good thing that they continue doing it. They should have kept it professional and left it in the past, but no, they continued it. They thought they could, but it just complicated things, especially because Grant, I think it's because of those memories, like, because in his mind, he was like, the fact of the matter is, okay, those were Grant's memories, but the fact is I can't tell the difference anymore because Grant's existence has become a part of his life now. And so there's a part of him, I don't even think it was just for cover purposes anymore. He started to actually care for Catherine. And I think that's a big reason why he broke it off with Carly, was because he actually wanted to make things work. Because he actually felt bad when she found out about the whole affair thing, which is kind of like, ugh. There's just so much to kind of break down and talk about. The fact is, the whole situation with that guy, what's his name again? Hall. Basically, he's kind of veteran because he's basically kind of been at this for a while. Because that's another thing, too. It's not just these 5 people here to save the world. There's a whole conglomerate, like, not conglomerate. Conglomerate's not the right word. There's basically thousands of them, not just here in the US, scattered all across the world, each having their own missions that are kind of being given to them by the director. Which at the end of it, we ended up finding out that the director is actually an AI program. I was like, oh, are we ever going to meet the director? Is the director going to transfer his consciousness here? It's like, oh no. Well, that does kind of come up, obviously, because it's kind of like the whole building the frame and everything. But it's like, no, the director is an AI machine that kind of issues out orders to kind of be like, hey, do this, 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 and that to kind of save the world. Right. Now, what I was saying was, before I kind of went off on a tangent, was the whole Hall situation, how that ended up playing out, because he was like, you guys are a bunch of rank amateurs. You, Trevor, are worried about dealing with your homework, being grounded, essentially. You, Carly, bringing a baby on these missions. And it's like, one of you is a heroin addict. So it's like, and you, Grant, are a novice at this whole situation. You're kind of new to the whole thing, because there's so many different levels to everything that's going on with this whole situation. Because it's like with Hall and his team, they were dealing with the fact is that a team that they were supposed to get a device from, kind of drop off the device or whatever, or pick up the device from or whatever. It was a Russian team, ended up betraying them and tried to kill them. And it's like, apparently that's not just a one-off thing. That happens quite often. There are some teams that just go rogue, because for some people it's like the future is a very bad place and they just don't care about, like, going back, trying to fix it. All they care about is like, oh, because everyone who gets there to the 21st century is like, oh my God, this is such a wonderful place. Like, holy crap. Because I think the only date they've actually ever mentioned was 2144. So whether that's exactly where they're from, I don't know. But that's kind of the only date that's really been thrown out there. So, but other than that, it's never really specified. Like, oh, this takes place, like the future they came from is the year 3000. I don't know. But, so I wonder will we kind of see more of that in the future, like more roguish teams. I mean, especially because kind of tailoring along that same situation. Well, I'll finish my thought here first. Like that whole situation, like I love how they were kind of setting it up, being like Hall's like Forbes, he's a good cop, so it's like he's getting too close to this whole situation. It's like we're gonna have to take him out of the equation. It's like we're not supposed to do that. But then Hall was kind of like, did you forget the situation is like the fact that the director has asked me to kill people before. It's like, yeah, there's a whole protocol of don't kill, but it's like there's certain situations where you have to kill people just because it's like it benefits the mission or whatever. And it's like, so you go do that. I mean, granted, if you want me to, I can handle it. I was like, Grant's like, no, I'll handle it. And the entire time they're making like, oh man, Grant's about to do it. I was like, Grant, please tell me you're not about to do it. And he didn't do it. I was super excited about, because I like his partner Forbes. I can't think of the actor's name. I don't even think I've ever known the actor's name, but I know him as like the fire chief. Not fire chief. He played a character on The Listener. He played one of the main characters on The Listener. I've seen him in other stuff too, but that's like one prominent role I definitely know him from. But nevertheless, I love the fact is that it's like, nope, it was all a situation where like Grant wasn't willing to do that. He wasn't going to kill Forbes, because it's like, what am I going to kill him for? Being a good cop, being good at his job, doing the right thing. He's doing his job because there's a suspect doing some very shady stuff that he's just trying to, do his job. So I was like, am I really going to kill him for that? So Grant decided not to go. I mean, there were not necessarily any ramifications for that. Granted, he was warned. I mean, granted, like, essentially they were kind of scolded a little bit, because it's like, okay, the fact of the matter is you did it. The director was like, okay, I'll accept these changes to the plan. Don't do it again, essentially. So, I mean, nothing really bad to happen to them to a certain degree. We do meet Luca, or is it not Luca, Lucas, in future episode with the whole Donner situation, which was a crazy situation too. It kind of coincides with the fact is we see rogue people, because he's an example of a person like he didn't go through with the whole bomb. Like essentially he was supposed to, like the person he was taking over was setting up a bomb, but he was supposed to defuse it. And he's like, oh, I'd ran through it 1,000 times, but it's like the director didn't give me enough time. The situation was just, I guess like you could honestly say he choked, or maybe it's because of what he does later on where it's like he just wanted to stay, because it was a situation where it's like, because at first it was kind of like, okay, the fact of the matter is, if he had misfired, if the situation had been like misfired or whatever, he should have died in the explosion. But if he was, the traveler, then he should have stopped the bomb. So it's like, okay, what's up with this whole situation? Either way, he should. So it's like, what's up? How did this whole situation go up? Because they ended up losing 3 other travelers. Because apparently they put it out there, like when they first started attempting this, like sending people out, the first wave, misfires actually happen pretty often. It was like, 30% of all, consciousness transfers like misfired. And we've seen a few happen throughout the season. There was that situation with that girl, Charlotte, and her family. Like, everyone else got theirs, but the one that was supposed to go inside of Charlotte misfired. Which is because of the whole tail situation, because of like to specifically pinpoint where to send a consciousness, you need the time of their death, elevation, longitude, and latitude. There's like a lot of factors, like you have to get it right. And it's like even being off a little bit, because it's like, for one, they were in a moving vehicle, and especially if while they're in the moving vehicle, she moves even just a little bit, just even if she's off by a little bit, that's enough to screw the whole thing up. So I actually kind of felt bad in that whole Donner situation, because it's like, I mean, granted, he tried to flip the script on Grant because he played dumb, pretend like, I was like, I'm not actually a traveler. He's like, I'm not a traveler. What's a traveler? He played dumb and everything. Grant was like, okay, what happened here? Okay, thinking it was just the real Donner dude. Because to me, I thought something definitely was fishy, because it's like, you could argue like he hit Grant by accident in his throat, destroying his communication, his comms device. But then it's like, but then, it's at the time I was thinking that, but then like, oh, after you played dumb, I was like, oh, what's up with that? And then later on, I'm like, oh, it's like retrospect, that kind of makes sense. And like, you could argue it was by accident, but it's crazy that specifically ends up hitting there. He knew exactly where the comms were, but you could argue that was dumb. You could argue in a situation like that without, getting revealed that he is a traveler, that is dumb luck. Because I kept wondering, I was like, okay, why is his lawyer sitting here listening to this? I was like, I should have called on sooner. I was like, something's weird here. And he's bringing it up. He's like, I'm a traveler. This guy's a traveler. And I was just like, oh. And then you have Grant being like, don't do this. And I'm like, why is he? It's like, no, it's not even for, because the fact is, Grant didn't put up any fight. He was like, oh, you're really going to listen to this madman? He didn't do that. And it's just like, he's like, don't do it. Don't do it. And he's like, I'm a traveler. And then he kind of reveals himself. And then it turns out everyone in that room with him is a traveler. And his main reason for doing that is because he wanted to stay. He didn't want to worry about saving the future. He didn't want to be worried about that. He just wanted to enjoy the beauty. I think I was kind of getting to it before, but I didn't really say anything. It's like, that's what everyone admires when they first come here, is the fact is everything, just the life. It's just, like I said, we never actually get a look at their future, but it's very run down to the point that they've never seen what a bear is. They see all these different trees. So a lot of nature is gone and withered away. But even with the situation being as it is, time, it's a interesting situation where it's like, instead of things necessarily getting better, things have actually kind of gotten worse because of them all helping out. Because a Helios situation, whether that's 100% resolved, we don't know, because it seems like in the future, time is affecting, like it is going forward in a situation where it's kind of like, oh yeah, like, what I mean is things are changing. It's like, because when you meet Grace later on, she talks about, they end up bringing up the fact is that in the future there are two factions. One side that follows the director's order and believes in a grand plan, when there's another side that's like, no, why should we be trusting humanity's future to an AI? Like, you can't trust it to a machine, which is kind of like, oh, and everyone there is kind of like, okay, wait, what? It's like, why is that what's happening here? So even certain events are changing. Like, for example, Philip, being the historian, uses that as a way of gambling, game money, because it's like he's got everything memorized, so that, because basically that's what historians do to kind of help mitigate with the situation of like, they also help them get money by like making bets and stuff like that and get money. And there's like a case where there was like a horse bet that wasn't right, and he was like, wait, what? He's like, okay, something changed. It's like, that was weird. And Grant's like, why didn't you tell me that sooner? He's like, the fact of the matter is that was that. Like, I didn't expect, like, it was like a one horse race. I didn't really expect things, I thought it was just that. So it's like, he didn't realize how grand the scale was on like how things have changed. So, also alluding to like, basically they, and Grace ended up bringing it up later, is that basically it had to be the faction. They were the ones that kidnapped the team and tried to prevent them from doing that mission. So, which in itself is kind of, because I'm trying to remember, was that before or after the whole Helios situation? Did they stop Helios before they got kidnapped, or was that after they got kidnapped? Because if it was before, then that would mean, time, like I said, I've said it countless times because I'm literally watching multiple time traveling shows. So it's kind of like, well, shows specifically that deal with time, because, some shows don't necessarily deal with necessarily time travel, just like You take Frequency, for example. That's not necessarily a time travel show, but it deals with the whole concept of time travel to a certain extent. You get what I'm meaning, because there's no actual like person time traveling, but there is the event of time travel itself happening to it. I'm just making matters worse. Point is that basically maybe like it's at some point in the future of present time, here in the present day, at some future point, they stopped Helios. And so that meant that changed the future. Like at that point, the future had already been changed. So the person came back to interrogate them, basically asking all these questions of like, oh, when are you from? Who is this? What is your mission? And stuff like that. Essentially testing their loyalty to see if they're true to the cause. Not necessarily like, whether they were like adamant about completing their mission. Because it's like, if they're not adamant about completing their mission, then that means they can be brought over to their side. Well, I mean, because we never really found out exactly which faction kidnapped him. Was it the faction that believes in the grand plan, or was it a faction that didn't believe in the grand plan? Because we never actually got to see who was behind the scenes. The only person we saw was that the bodyguard in that situation, which like that was pretty brutal. That whole situation. When Carly did, she literally bit into his arm so that he literally bleed out, and she just latched on and didn't let go. I was like, ugh! I was like, there's so much blood everywhere. It's pulling into the water beneath them and everything. And that's an example of a point, like kind of focusing on that. That was like one of the first points I feel like Trevor's personality, like he'd always been kind of cool, calm, and collected, but it's like, to me, that was like one of the moments where you saw his personality kind of shine. He's like, yo, take me. He's like, Mr. Giant, I'm gonna be super upset if you don't choose me. He's like, yes, finally you picked me. It's like, so where are we going? We going up or we going down? I'm betting down. He's like, son of a bitch, you got me. We're going up. And it's like, seeing that funny side of his personality was really nice. He easily became one of my favorite characters, him and David, just because of the interactions they had with just everyone. Just Trevor in a moment like that, but David just being the awkward dude he is and everything. Grant's up to him. He's like, someone go back and, get back on your bike. He's like, haha. So Marcy did tell you about me because you knew I rode, because there's no way you would know I ride a bike. He looks down at him. He's like, I see you got your pants leg tucked into your sock. I was just basically making a calculated guess. And it's like, oh, man. Yeah, he's like, okay, so should I contact you? You can call me around. And he's driving away. He's like, okay, I'll just. And in the whole situation with Marcy, every time he ran into Marcy, it's like, okay, well, what did I? You might want to put on some clothes. She's like, oh, is this appropriate? He's like, yeah. I mean, you might want to put on some underwear too. But I really like that too, like that situation of like Marcy and David. It was kind of a sad situation actually, because it's like, well, for obvious reasons, but I'll get to that in a second. But mainly it's because it's like, for David, it's like he felt weird about it, because it's like he's supposed to be taking care of Marcy, but it's like the person in front of him isn't necessarily the Marcy he's come to know. She's different. She's better. No stutter, no mental issues, but it's just kind of like he felt like he was taking advantage of her. But it's like, is he really taking advantage of her? Because it's like, this is a different person in front of him, which it was. But I love the whole lie about like, yeah, I work with the FBI, which isn't too much of a lie, but basically, man, she's like, are you trying to understand everything? He's like, are you Batgirl? And that's kind of how he constantly referred to her as. Like, obviously, because there was that point later on in a season where he kind of kicked her out because it was too hard because he liked her, and it's just like there's a lot of secrets he had to deal with. But it was super sad when you ended up finding out what was happening to Marcy, because she didn't tell anyone that basically she was essentially dying from what her host had, and she tried to mitigate the situation, trying to help herself, make serum of her own. Like, I think she basically had David tap her spine to kind of get some fluid so that she could kind of use that as a temporary serum, but it wouldn't last forever. It was temporary. And that whole situation was like uber sad, because it's like she never actually got the chance. Like, David was on his way back, but she never got the chance to tell him how she really felt, because basically they had to the only way to save Marcy was to reboot her consciousness. Essentially, when her consciousness transferred to Marcy, basically a copy of it existed kind of in the system. So it's like they could overwrite her current consciousness with her original consciousness. But that would basically mean everything that she's experienced, over the season, she would forget it all. And it'd be basically Marcy as she like, this would be as if it was Marcy, like, that we met in the first episode again. It should be like that with that much information, not knowing, like, not knowing her entire team or David and the relationship. Like, basically, they had to break a lot of stuff down for her, which is like, we did see certain things that, like, they were kind of like small nods towards it. Like, the whole situation with Philip, like, she ended up finding out his, heroin situation. She's like, is this yours? He's like, yeah, you were helping me wane off of it, but then, like, some things happened. So she's like, well, the fact is you're only going to get, like, this amount of it because any more will kill you. And it's just like, the fact is you're going to be under my watch any more than that. And I'm going to be, like, I'm going to keep an eye on you because it's like, I'm the one that's going to help you deal with it. And you almost see like a little small smirk come across his face when they're having that conversation, because they literally had that conversation before when she originally found out. But also you see almost a sad look on his face, because it's like, the fact is that this isn't the same Marcy in front of him. Like, because he even refers to them as the Marcy we knew before, that we met throughout the season, was Marcy 1.0, and the one standing before them is 2.0. Because he's kind of like, he's like, it's sad. It's like, she's not the same person that she was. He's like, the Marcy we knew before was kind of fragile. The one that's in front of them is more like she acts more like a soldier, like a hardened soldier. But it's like, he thinks maybe the original Marcy was a little more fragile because she knew she was dying and she had a limited amount of time. So she was like her guard down was a little, like, you can definitely see like how, and it's kind of kudos to the actress, like kind of portraying Marcy in a different way. Because this is Marcy, like, because she's coming into this with everyone knowing so much about her, but her not knowing anything about them, and it makes the relationship harder on her, and it's just, and it does seem like she is kind of like it's like, oh, you're not the Marcy we know, and it's like, that's got to be pretty tough. She even admits, she's like, just give me a chance to catch up. I'm the same person. Just give me time to kind of catch up with everything with you, David, and everything. There was even that one moment, kind of a constant thing that kept happening, is every time she wanted David to shut up, she would kiss him. And it's like, oh, you see that moment? She's like, oh yeah, she's like, I do remember something. It's like, oh yeah. She's like, yeah, that you're a reporter. And it's like, oh yeah, that's, well, I'm not a reporter. So that was kind of all a lie and everything. And it's like, that's so heartbreaking because that, I don't know, like, because part of you almost thinks like there is a little bit of her there. I mean, you could argue maybe that's part of her original personality anyway, but her like trying to stop David from talking, getting him to shut up by kissing him. So, and there was that whole situation when that guy broke into his house. Well, the assassin broke into his apartment and had a gun to his head, and Marcy literally sniped him and was like, holy crap. And David's like, holy crap, there's a dead suit in my apartment. She's like, okay, so what I'm gonna need you to do is we need to get rid of this body, and he's like, what are you talking about? Just get rid of the body. He's like, no, we gotta call the cops. She's like, okay, you want to call the cops? You want me to lie? She's like, yeah, either we get rid of the body or we have to lie about it. And it's like, and it seems like David chose the latter, which is going to complicate things a lot, because he kind of gets dragged off by cops, because it's like you just happen to be on a phone, 2 minute, like, made 2 phone calls prior to this whole situation, plus the fact is that the shot came from your neighbor's apartment, like a nearby apartment. So it's kind of like they're asking him questions about that, coinciding that with the whole Jeff situation, because the assassin in Charlotte's body came after Carly. Jeff ended up putting her down, but Carly just drove off, and he's literally calling her up. It's like, what the hell, Carly? You're the only one that can prove that I killed that girl because you were in danger. Then there's that whole situation where her and Grant were talking about, like, oh, their relationship and everything. She told him, like, no, stop. I was like, oh, you're going to help out Jeff? Oh, that's very sweet. Oh, you're just going to make out with Grant. Okay, never mind about that. Which sucked, but I don't know. Like, part of me is like, it's almost like there's that part of me. It's like you see him as being kind of a good father and caring father that he is. In his own mind, he is thinking he's doing the right thing, but at the same time, you're like, but you're a piece of crap human being. So I was like, oh, maybe she's going to help him out. But it's like, in the end of it all, it's kind of like he doesn't really deserve to be. I mean, I get why Carly wouldn't want to help him out, because I feel like, I guess in her mind, she's like, I can use this as an opportunity to prove that he's an unfit father because of this whole circumstance. Like I said, that's kind of the last we've seen of that. So I'll be like, interested to see where that kind of goes in the future. Like whether like because he tried to like take her to court and everything, paint her as like an aggressive person. Like the fact is that she kicked his ass, even kicked him in the nuts at one point in time when they were talking and everything. It's like the fact of the matter is she only acted like that because you were abusive. It's also because Carly knows, like, that's how Carly's host, the host Carly, originally died in the original timeline, is by him, because basically she tried to fight back and Jeff ended up killing her for it. So that's why she definitely knows Jeff's a bad guy. I mean, especially the way he grabs on her and talks to her, and he wants to make it seem like it's her fault. It's like, no, 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 no. It was just this one time thing. It's like, no. Like, we haven't seen it, but the way they talk about it is like he was abusing Carly for a long time, even before, like, her mind, like, the whole time travel aspect got added to it. So it's not like it's a recent thing. So there were certain things that kind of caught me off guard, like the whole Ray situation. Like, that was another thing too I noticed about this. This has like the actor who plays Ray as well as the actor who plays Grace, just because they're like, I know them from the show Continuum. They played two specific particular characters in Continuum. So when I see them, it just kind of got in my head, like that being another time travel show. So I thought that was just kind of interesting. But they must be Canadian actors or something, because it's like, I don't know, because you see certain actors kind of transferring over to certain things. Definitely Canadian actors, because this is actually a Canadian show now that I think about it. Not that it's a thing, but it's like, I think that kind of shows you, like, if it's like, a lot of stuff, if it's Canadian shows, like they probably tend to pick Canadian actors, I guess. I mean, it's just kind of like, not every American television show does that, but more often than not, if you have an American-based show, it's like, oh, obviously a lot of the actors are going to be American, which isn't, like I said, isn't always the case, because you do get British actors to portray Americans. So, but it was just kind of interesting to me. Nevertheless, getting back to the point I was trying to make was the whole Ray situation, because I thought he was going to be a consistent problem that Philip would have to deal with, because every time he has to needs help from him, or needs this and that, he has to give Ray some bets and stuff like that. And it's like, oh man, this guy is going to be annoying. But then it's like, because even Philip describes him as like, yeah, my friend Ray. It's like, he's your friend? Because there was even a point, because he got Philip some food. He even took Philip to an AA meeting. So it's like, I guess Ray was working past his gambling problems, and it's like, holy crap, I thought you were going to be a nuisance the entire time. I mean, that's the last time we saw him, but that's kind of interesting. Like, for Philip, that's his only friend. It's just kind of interesting that things played out that way, because I wasn't expecting. I thought his character was just going to be a leech the entire season, but it's like, no, he had a turnaround because he was going to AA for his gambling problems, because he kind of referenced the fact is that he has a son that he doesn't get along with. And I mean, that story kind of got cut short, because Philip is like, shut the hell up, send this money to Steven's family, and just leave me the hell alone, essentially. That was also, because that whole Steven situation, along with other situations, what was that detective who was after him? Was it like Gower or something? Grower? Something like that. The detective that was chasing after him that was having a heart attack. Like that plus Steven, like those were situations where it's like, he's so focused on his mission. It's like they're not, for one, they're not supposed to save people's lives. So in a situation like that, he probably could have saved the detective, could have saved Steven. There was time, especially because he showed up at the funeral because he felt responsible, even though he's not. Because in a situation like that, the reason why they didn't know about Philip being a heroin addict, is because that's how Philip actually died. Like in that situation in the original timeline, him and Steven both died because they overdosed, and that was Philip's first time, so his parents were probably like in denial, so that's why on the official record it never really happened. So like I said, these are kind of historical records, so they probably, it's far into the future, so a lot of the information isn't as accessible. So most likely it's probably like based off personal databases. There's no like, because it's like you would think there's like an Emmy report to be like, oh yeah, he overdosed or something like that, showing you that he was a heroin addict, not unless his parents got that redacted from the file or something like that. They're like, please don't include that. There's like blah 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 blah. I mean, I don't know. Because that's another thing too. We never actually got to meet any of the people they're impersonating, their family members. Like, because Grant's mom was brought up in the conversation, as we, Philip's family situation, Carly's, Marcy's. I mean, Trevor's the only person we've actually got to meet his parents, which was kind of an interesting storyline too, seeing him coinciding with his dad. I mean, because they kind of were on a rocky start. The moment, Trevor was no longer Trevor. But it did seem like by the time the season was coming to an end that they were kind of in a good place. I was actually surprised about the whole situation with his girlfriend Renee when she was first introduced. I was like, oh, she's like, oh man, that's such a beautiful thing. You want me to help you find yourself, and it's like, oh, that's sweet. Then he has his best friend there to kind of help him figure stuff out, and then it's like, oh, and then you find out that his girlfriend is not a good person because he was sitting down having lunch, and there was a girl who fell, and it's like, holy crap, my girlfriend's a bully essentially because they were even having that conversation with Grace, and then Trevor kind of turns to her, it's like, you're not actually a good person. He's like, here's some money. Can you tell that girl hopefully this is enough to replace her phone? And it's like, holy crap, is this going to be a situation where it's like, Trevor's reinvented? I thought it was going to be a situation of like, he ended up dumping Renee and he ends up being with that particular girl because it was just like, oh, he's not that same person anymore. I thought that's where this storyline was going to take, but it didn't because it didn't focus too heavily on their personal lives. I mean, obviously their personal lives play big parts in it, but it wasn't like full on 100% focus because it's balancing a little bit of their personal lives with, trying to save the world type of situation. So, but I mean, Renee kind of redeemed herself to a certain extent because there was that whole situation with the stealing from the clothes store and whatnot. And she's like, oh, I'm doing this because you told me you like this. This kind of, this kind of turned you on and everything. But Trevor wasn't okay with it and everything. But then she kind of revealed the fact that she didn't ever really like doing stuff like that. She only did it because Trevor, really, she only did it to impress him, but now it's like you kind of got to see her in a different light, and it's like her and Trevor were meditating and everything. She even made that joke. He's like, so why were you with me and everything? She's like, I wasn't with you because you were playing football. He's like, right? It wasn't? And she's like, yeah, it's because of the size of your penis. And then it's like, and then she sees the look on Trevor's face like, wait, what? And she's like, I'm joking. It's just like, it's so interesting to get to see that different side of her. It's like, it's nice when you get to see those characters kind of develop and change. It's not like she stayed like your stereotypical bitchy high school girl. Like, oh, I'm Miss Popular. I'm the best person ever. I mean, granted, there was that moment later on after Grace got replaced, that she was talking to that same girl. It does seem like Renee's still being a bit bitchy, but she possibly is eased up. Maybe. I don't know. I'd like to see more of that in the future to find out what happened with that. I wonder if the same thing applied to Trevor's best friend, the one that was trying to stop him. Like, we saw him a few times throughout the season. Like, I wonder if he a douchebag too or not. But nevertheless. But that situation with Grace was kind of sad because it's like, I guess that's kind of, because I was wondering about that, the way Trevor was like smiling and the way he acted around her and everything. I was like, does he kind of have a thing for her? I was like, is this going to turn into that weird area? It didn't get there, but I was like, it could have if they wanted to, because the fact is, I mean, he might be in a 17-year-old's body, but he's really 100, plus, years old. And it's like, I don't know. I guess because she was so reasonable, she was willing to help him out because he ended up acing that test, but he ended up getting 3 of them wrong on purpose. Like they even saw that he erased the answers. So his teacher was like, oh, obviously he cheated. But then sitting down with him, Grace was like, oh crap, he's not cheating. He's just smart. And then there's the whole situation of because one of the names because Philip had wrote a name earlier on in the season, on the, obviously when he was kind of in the mode of being like, oh, we got to save everyone. And he was scribbling all those different names. And then there was a point at the end of one episode, Trevor was like, I know this person. That was it. They never it was kind of interesting how that storyline went because I was like, I kept wondering, I was like, they never brought that up. It's because Trevor was secretly dealing with it. And because he knew specifically when that person was going to die. And in that case, it turned out to be Grace. I should have figured because out of anyone in his personal life, he spent the most time with her to a certain extent, got closer to her to an extent, and I'm thinking that played a big role in it. I mean, also just because he liked her as a person, she had a very nice personality, she was a very caring person, but then obviously at the end up, she kind of got replaced by the person who's actually one of the programmers who created the director. She essentially also the one that helped Marcy. Yes, she helped her, but more so than anything, she used her because she basically used Marcy as a backdoor. By having Marcy look at the program, she basically had her take the information back to the future, the kind of networking that the consciousness kind of rides on. The information rode back through that channel and went to the director and kind of rebooted the system. And it's like, wait a minute. You reboot it. You reset the director. Don't you really think how messed up that is? Because it's she did it mainly so that the faction wouldn't be able to hack into the director. But then there's so many things, like for instance, Trevor's getting information like a text on his phone, being like, okay, the director wants you to destroy the frame, but it's like, how do you know that's actually the director and not just the faction taking over him? But then at the same time, it's like, but how do you know that it wasn't that? Because it all comes down to like, when did Grace actually reset the director? It's like, in the time it took Grace to finally get to the point where she reset him, who's to say like that, on the guy, wasn't it, it's not Eli, is it? The other programmer that her and Grace and him had history. Like, who's to say like him getting the information to build that frame wasn't actually sent by the faction? Or what if the faction had already gotten to the director and they reprogrammed him, and his whole point was to get the director from the future, a reprogrammed director, to the present day? What, I don't know. Because I'm curious what would happen if they were to get the director in present day. I mean, what would that do? Like, how wouldn't that mean anyone else they wanted to transfer, like in the past, would have a hard time getting to the future? Or would it be able to do stuff like that from the present day? It's hard to say. I mean, because as you can see in the present day, they have access to a lot of technology. Now, obviously they're not bringing it with them, but I'm guessing like they bring their knowledge with them. So it's like they can go back into the past and build they get the materials they need, and they take the information they have from the future and they build it in present day. Because it's like, how do you have access to a lot of the technology you do? You should, because you can't bring anything back with you. You can only bring your consciousness. So, like for instance, there's a device to erase people's memories, which we've seen that happen to Catherine. Which I'm curious, like, how will that play out? Will she come like? Because obviously it made her completely forget, and she was kind of like, oh, like it made her feel like she had a hangover or whatever. And it's like, it makes you wonder will her memories ever come back, or is that something completely going or not? Because Trevor was originally going to use that on Grace when he kind of explained everything, but Grace thought he was just crazy. And it seems like with the whole Tail situation, they don't necessarily, because he just needed to get her away from the whole situation long enough so that her time of death would pass, so that no one would be able to get her. It's like, once someone lives past their time of death, they're off limits. But the moment Grace drove off and she tried to call someone, there was a signal there, so it gave them a place that they could pinpoint her exact location, and she got hijacked. Which, like I said, in a situation like that, sadly, once their consciousness is there, like once their consciousness has been replaced, they're essentially dead. The person that inhabits their body, that was kind of a thing that we saw with the engineer. Like, that dude Gleason kept killing his own men, yet she just kept jumping back into different bodies, because they don't actually die when their host body dies. The only way for their consciousness to die is if it's overwritten. So that's like, you take Marcy 1.0 and 2.0. Marcy 1.0 is dead because it was overwritten with 2.0. The same thing happened to that Donner dude. His punishment was for him to be overwritten, so a different traveler took over that body. So that's the only way you can die, is if your consciousness is erased. But I think it's a situation that because in Grant's case, when he got hurt with the whole plane crash and everything, which is kind of nice. I'm glad it worked out that way, that he was like, no, I'm gonna save Catherine's life. It's like, try and find me a way to save her life. I mean, it's kind of sad because he's saying this super loud, being like, yeah, tell me a way to save, everyone up here is dead, sure is as good as dead, but I need to save my wife. And it's like, I'm surprised no one was like, wait, excuse me, what were you saying about saving someone's life and the rest of us being dead? But it's probably one of those situations where obviously it's said louder in a TV show just to make sure you can hear it, but really in the context of the situation they're not saying it that loud. But that was definitely a moment where he was really like showing that, like, no, he legitimately did care about her. So it seems it's not even just about the whole situation with the memories. I'm sure that helped push it in the right direction, but more so than anything, he really did legitimately care about her, because the only reason why she was on that plane was because she thought her husband was cheating on her, which to a certain degree he was. To a certain degree he wasn't, because technically that's not her husband. I want to know how much of the truth would eventually get out. Will David ever fully know the truth? I feel like out of anyone, he's going to be one of the first people to know. I mean, granted, Grace got to find out the truth. I mean, but she's no longer alive for it to really matter. You know what I mean? So, sadly, in Trevor's case, super sadly. But I wonder what like some, because usually in a situation like that where there's a secret being kept, usually it's the partner. Like, so for example, maybe it might be Forbes who ends up finding out first. Maybe Grant's in a situation where he has no choice but to tell him. I mean, I wonder is there protocols to really be like, yo, don't tell anyone what you're doing type of situation, let them know. I mean, one of the few people that knows the truth is Delaney. She's the one that kind of started this whole situation because like her antimatter device stuff that she was building, essentially the government wanted to kind of weaponize it, and apparently from the future that they're from, they did, but they kind of used that whole situation as a means of kind of dealing with the whole asteroid thing. So she's like one of the few people that knows 100% about the whole time travel thing. And I was wondering about the whole Gleason situation, like, will we kind of be seeing him in the future? But as we saw, he was kind of the last one to kind of get possessed, and he was about to try and kill himself, but he was out of bullets. And then he ended up being the one to pull the trigger, so the facility and it exploded. So he's done with. Because as you can see, they get people high enough positions. Because there was that guy, I forgot his last name is Bishop. Like after the plane crash, he ended up getting possessed. I think he was a congressman or something like that. So they are possessing people of high value and stuff like that. So it makes you wonder the people that captured Grant's team, maybe maybe they have government connections too. The reason why they were able to do what they did, like without like to be able to do what you did, like smashing into someone's car and just dragging foreign conscious people from a car like that. And also the whole situation where they faked that they had Carly's baby, and they also showed Marcy them shooting Philip. So it's kind of like, you know, I mean, granted, that's probably some future technology that they use, but still. I mean, I'm very interested. I really like this, and I'm very interested to see what I haven't really read anything. It's only been out for like a little over a week at a time. I mean, because it's like January 2nd when I'm recording this. I don't know when this will actually go up, but I don't know. It's just kind of like it's a very interesting show, and I'm very interested to see more of it. I don't know if Netflix has already made a decision. I'm sure it takes a little while before they'll be like, oh yeah, we're going to bring this back for another season or something. So I'm very curious to see what they're going to do with the second season, especially with the way the first season ended. Like, you know, Grace getting shot. You also had Trevor getting shot. You know, the bullet went through her and into him. Basically, it seems like the director sent a message at the very end of it, possessing one of the engineers and being like, hey, you need to destroy that frame now, like, because this is kind of a trap by the faction or whatever. Because the thing with, you know, the director sending messages like that, it kills whoever they use. Like, basically, there's something with kids, something about their brains being underdeveloped makes it so there's no lasting effects. Because if you do it to a full-grown adult, like, using them as a means of message, it ends up killing them. Like they just immediately die after they give the message. It's just kind of like you saw it on a little bit what happened too on a plane, like when Grant was trying to save Catherine's life. One of the people got possessed. It's like, hey, what are you doing? Don't do that. Like you're going against your mission orders, and then she immediately died. There's a whole situation with Hall, like basically when he was like when Grant was, you know, handling one of the suspects that was dying, like at the last moment, he got possessed, you know, turned into a messenger. So, but it's like if the message is important enough, and the situation is that like it needs to be said immediately, and there's no kids around, then yeah. At that last moment, we see Grant about to use the axe on the machine, but all of a sudden we see Forbes bust him with a whole bunch of FBI agents. So it's kind of like, holy crap. So didn't really say anything because it kind of ends there, but it's like I can explain. So I'm curious to see where that all goes. I mean, the reason why it worked out like that was because Catherine, being worried, kind of called Forbes, so he bought backup and everything, probably tracked down where Grant was, because previously Grant had lied. Basically, during the whole surgery situation, like Forbes was trying to track him down, especially because Philip stole his car to kind of cover up the fact is that Grant was connected to the whole plane crash, that he was even up there, because there was no record of him being up there and everything. That basically there was a whole situation like to kind of cover his tracks. He was like, oh yeah, Philip, he's my CI, and he was trying to prove a point that like, oh yeah, like I could be gotten to at any point in time. Like that's what this whole thing was about, stealing his car. And it's like, oh yeah, I sent you those text messages. Didn't you get him? It's like, no, I didn't. He's like, oh yeah, sorry about that. I was like, oh, you kept him from getting my text message. Just making a good cover story. So I'm wondering how he's going to handle this whole situation too. Because especially with such a weird place where the season ended. Like, this seems like a type of show that it should be more than 12 episodes. Because, I mean, Netflix is kind of in that point where it kind of does anything between 10 to 13 episodes. I don't know if they ever plan on expanding upon that or not in the future. Obviously, stuff that's not Netflix original, like, is obviously going to be like, whatever length it is, whatever shows they get the rights to stream or whatever. But it's like for the original content, I mean, or less, obviously, but it's like 13's like the most I've seen so far. So I'm curious because it seemed like a type of show where it seems like there should be more to it than that. Like if it was on television, it feels like this show would be like a 22 episode type of show. So I mean, not going to judge them for anything, and maybe it fits better as a 12 episode type of thing anyway. So I don't know. I'm gonna just be very curious to see where things go in the second season, because there was a whole thing, because another kind of conflicting thing at the end was like Carly received the message to kill Grant, and it's like, okay, you're telling me we should follow the director's orders, right? Well, it's telling me to kill you, so it's like, okay, what's up with this whole situation? Because it wasn't just them. Boyd got the same situation. I think specifically the message was sent to people that was close to Grant. It might also be that faction that kidnapped them, I guess trying to get to them, because it's like, so was the person that sent a message to Trevor line, was the person sending a message to Carly line, like who was, like it's hard to say in a situation like that when the person that's leading the whole situation is a AI. It's like really hard to say like any digital communication, whether it's been tainted with or not. So that's why I'm guessing like having, I think it has its benefits and its disadvantages of having an AI as your leader, because the advantages is like, well, it has a lot more power to process things, can take in a lot more information, kind of dish out orders a little bit more, can think 1,000 moves ahead instead of just the few that a human could. Granted, the disadvantage is a human can't be hacked. I mean, you could argue with the whole situation of how time travel works that technically humans are being hacked to a certain degree, but it's like a human can't be hacked the same way a computer is. But that's just a discussion on it. Once again, I have to apologize because I really get like this when it comes to Netflix stuff. I'm always all over the place, but I do apologize for that. I just kind of had to run through some thoughts about things. If you ever feel the need to like discuss a show, do like leave some comments down below, like some stuff that you liked and some questions you might have had, like, oh yeah, maybe we can talk it out and kind of figure stuff out together and stuff like that, because that's kind of another reason why I do these. I want to kind of have a conversation because I talk about the things that I like, and I really like this, and I'd like to see a second season for this to find out like where everything would go. I mean, granted, the show's literally been out, like I said, at this point like a little more than a week, so it's going to be a very long time. It probably won't be until like late this year, if not early like 2018 by the time something like that comes out. So I mean, so I guess it really depends on the whole production schedule, and like I said, whether or not they decide to make a second season of it or not. So Netflix is usually kind of like, yeah, they kind of do their own thing. I don't think they really, I think they kind of answer to certain things, like depending on whether people like it or not, but it's not like a viewership type of, maybe there is. I don't really know how Netflix determines whether or not they're going to bring something back or not. It seems like they kind of do their own thing. If they enjoy a show, and I guess if there's an audience for it, enough of an audience, they're like, yeah, go ahead. Like, it's not a situation where it's kind of like, it's like, oh, the ratings have to be this, like this number or above before we be like, this show's worth keeping around. So I don't know, like, just got random thoughts. Nevertheless, really, that's kind of all I wanted to talk about. At least that's coming to my mind right now. There's like a lot to talk about in this show, so I don't know. Maybe I'll for once kind of do the thing where I kind of go through the subreddits and stuff like that and kind of talk about it there too as well. Or I don't know, like, find other places to kind of outlet about it, because I doubt anyone's going to really watch this, so it's just going to stay a one-way conversation. So, but nevertheless, that's the end of it. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.